Hello guys, my name is Ankara and you're welcome to Lizama Stitches. So in this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make shirts. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So this is my pattern paper. Now this is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. Now this is my button allowance. This part is my button allowance. I'm going to take my vertical measurement. Now this is my bust point. This is my waist point, and this is the full length of my shirt. Now I'm going to extend the points. My bust point, my waist point, the full length of the shirt. Now I'm going to connect the points. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to take my neck measurement. My neck width is 3 inches. Now I'm taking my measurement from this line, and my neck depth is 3 inches. And I'll connect the points. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to take my shoulder measurement. Now half of my shoulder measurement is 7 inches. Plus half inches seam allowance, that gives you 7.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 7.5 inches here. Now on this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant, and I'll connect it to the neckline, just like this. Now on this point, I'm going to mark half of my armhole measurement. Half of my armhole measurement is 8 inches. And I'm going to connect the points. Now I'm going to extend this line. Now this is going to be my chest point. So I'm going to label these lines. Now this is my chest point, this is my bust point, this is my waist point, and this is the full length of my shirt. So the next thing I'm going to do is to find the midpoint of this line. Now the midpoint is 4 inches. And I'm going to mark 4 inches. Now from this point, I'm going to go in by 3/4, and I'll mark. Now on this point, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and that gives you 9.5 inches. And I'll connect this point to this point. Now I'm going to impute my dart, but this is optional. You can decide not to use dart for your shirt, but I want to use dart for my shirt because I want my shirt to be a little bit fitted. Now if you're making a shirt for a man, there is no need putting dart. So I'm going to be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. Half of my nipple to nipple measurement is 4 inches. So I'm going to mark it on my bust point, and I'll also mark it on I'll mark it on the hem of of my shirt, and I'll connect the points. Now the next thing I'm going to do on this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch, and on this point I'm going to go up by 1 inch. On this point, I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line, and I'll connect the points. So now I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. Now on my chest point, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and that gives you 9.5 inches. Now I already have my 9.5 inches here, so I'm going to add ½ inch for ease. Now this is my ½ inch for ease. Now on the waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement on the waist point. My waist measurement divided by 4 gives you 8 inches, plus this 1 inch for dart, and ½ inch for ease. Now on the hem of my shirt, I'm going to take my hip measurement on the hem of my shirt. My hip, I'm going to mark my hip divided by 4, and that gives you 10 inches, plus ½ inch for ease. And I'll connect the points. I'm going to curve my shirt. Now for me to do that, from the hem line, I'm going to come up by 1.5 inches and I'll mark. Now I'm going to connect this point to, I'm going to connect it with my curved ruler, just like this. So for the button, please pay attention to what I'm going to do here. Now the first line I'm going to mark is my overlap. It's for overlap. Now that line is going to be 3/4 inch. 3/4 inch. So I'm going to connect the points. Now take note, the first line is 3/4 inch. Now I'm going to mark the second line. Now the second line is going to serve as the interfacing, and it's going to be 1 inch. 1 inch. And I'll connect the points. Now I'm going to mark another line again. Now this is the last line, and it's going to be 1 inch. Now this line is going to serve as the facing. Now I'm going to connect the points. So the next thing I'm going to do is to add my seam allowance all around it. Now I'm going to add 1 inch here, and I'm going to add 1/2 inch on the shoulder. I'm going to reduce 1 inch from the shoulder, from this front shoulder. Now because it's a shirt, the front shoulder is usually shorter than the back shoulder. The back shoulder is usually longer than the front shoulder. So I'm going to remove 1 inch from this shoulder. Now I'm marking from the seam allowance. So I'm marking 1 inch. And when I mark my 1 inch, I'm still going to have my seam allowance here. So I'm marking 1 inch. I took my mark from the seam allowance, so I still have my seam allowance here. So this 1 inch that I'm removing here, I'm going to return it on the back panel. Now take note, my 1/2 inch seam allowance is still here. What I marked is 1 inch. Now I'm going to cut it. So I'm cutting off this 1 inch, which I'm going to replace on the back panel. And I'm folding in. Now I'm folding in my button allowance. So this is my front panel. Now I'm going to keep it aside and bring the back panel. Now this is my back panel. So this is the starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. This is my waist point, and this is the full length of the shirt. So I'm going to start by taking my neck measurement. My neck width is 3 inches and my neck depth is 1 inch. And I'll connect the points. Now I'm going to take my shoulder measurement. Now half of my shoulder measurement is 7 inches plus 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to come down by 1 inch and I'll connect it to the neckline for my shoulder slant. Now after that, I'm going to impute my armhole measurement. Now half of my armhole measurement is 8 inches. And I'll connect the points. After that, I'm going to extend this line. Now let me label these lines. Now this is my chest point, this is my waist point, and this is the full length of my shirt. So I'm going to extend the chest point. Now I'm going to impute my dart. For me to do that, I'll be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. Half of my nipple to nipple measurement is 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches here. I'll mark 4 inches here, and I'll mark 4 inches here. And I'll connect the points. So from the chest point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. And from the hemline, I'm going to come up by 2 inches. And on the waistline, I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line. And I'll connect the points. So the next thing I'm going to do is to impute my armhole curve. Now I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. Now the midpoint of this line is 4 inches. And I'm going to mark 4 inches. So on this line, I'm going to divide my boards by 4, and that gives you 9.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 9.5 inches here. And I'll connect the points. So now I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. So on my chest point, I'm going to divide my bust circumference by 4, and that gives you 9.5 inches. Plus ½ inch for ease. Now on the waist point, I'm going to divide my waist circumference by 4, and that gives you 8 inches. Plus 1 inch for that. Plus ½ inch for ease. Now on the hem of my shirt, I'm going to divide my hip circumference by 4, and that gives you 10 inches. Plus ½ inch for ease. And I'll connect the points. Now on the shoulder, I'm going to mark 1 inch. Now that 1 inch I removed from the front panel, I'm going to return it here. Now the back panel is usually longer than the front panel, so that 1 inch that I removed at the front, I'm bringing it back to the back panel. Now I'm going to connect the points. And I'm going to add my ½ inch seam allowance. And I'll connect it. So on the side, I'm using 1 inch seam allowance. Now here, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches because I want to curve my shirt. I'm marking 1.5 inches, and I'm going to connect it. I'm going to curve it with my curved ruler. Now I'm going to add my seam allowance, and I'll cut it. So I'm going to use it to cut my fabric. So this is my back panel. Now this is my back panel, and this is the front panel. So I've cut my fabric. Now I have my front panel and my back panel here. Now take note, my back panel was cut on fold. I have 1 piece here. Now this is it. It's one piece. While the front panel, I have 2 pieces. So now the next thing I'm going to do now, the back panel is longer than the front panel, so I'm going to fold. Now when I sew it, I'm going to have something like this. Now I'm going to notch all the prominent lines. So now I'm going to work on the button. Now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fold on the first part, and I'll fold it again, and I'll sew. So now, after working on the buttons, I'm going to bring the back panel. Now I'm going to place the front panel on the back panel, right side facing right side, and I'll sew. Now I'm going to start by joining the shoulder. I'll join the shoulder. Now after joining the shoulder, I'm going to sew the side. I'll sew the side with 1 inch seam allowance, and I must have finished tidying up the button allowance. Now this is my shirt. I've joined the front panel to the back panel, and this is the outcome. Now the next thing I'm going to do is, now when you look at this shirt, you see that the back panel, the back shoulder is longer than the front shoulder. So this is how to sew your shirt. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to work on the neckline. I'm going to sew my collar. Now for me to do that, I'm going to measure my neckline. Now my neckline is 21.5 inches. 21.5 inches. Now I'm going to keep this aside, and I'm going to work on the collar. Now this is my paper. I'm going to rule a straight line. Now after that, I'm going to divide 21.5 inches by 2, and that gives you 10 3/4. 21.5 inches divided by 2 gives you 10 3/4. Now I'm going to find the midpoint of this 10 3/4. Now I'll fold my tape into 2. Now this is the midpoint of this line. Now on this point, I'm going to go up by 1/2 inch, and I'll mark, and I'll connect it. I'll connect the points. Now from here, I'm going to connect this point to this point with the curved part of my ruler, just like this. Now from here, I'm going to mark 1 inch on this line, just like this. I'm going to mark 1 inch, and on this curved part, I'm going to continue. I'll still continue with my 1 inch. And I'll connect the points. Now the next thing I'm going to do is now on this point, I'm going to go in by 1/2 inch, and I'll curve my collar. I'm going to curve my collar with my free hand, just like this, and I'll cut. Now take note, my paper is on fold. So now this is my collar stand. Now I'm going to keep it aside and draft the collar fall. Now this is the paper I'll be using for the collar fall. Now take note, my paper is on fold. I'm going to start by ruling a straight line. So the same measurement I used on the collar stand, that's what I'm going to use on the collar fall. Now I'm going to be working with 10 3/4, and now to determine the height of my collar, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches. And I'll mark 2.5 inches here, and I'll also mark it here. Now this line is also 10 3/4. I'm going to mark my 10 3/4 here, and I'll connect the points. Now on this point, I'm going to mark 1 inch, and I'll connect it to this point, just like this. Now on this point, I'm going to go up by 1/2 inch, and I'll connect it to this point with my curved ruler, just like this. And I'll cut. So now this is my collar fall, and this is my collar stand. So my collar is ready. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to transfer this on my fabric. I'm going to cut 2 of this, and I'm going to cut 2 of this. Now I'm going to use this to cut the interfacing. While cutting the interfacing, I'm not going to add seam allowance, but while cutting the fabric, I'm going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance all around it. I'm going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance on the collar stand and on the collar fall. Now this is my collar. I've added my 1/2 inch seam allowance on my fabric. So now this is my interfacing. Now I didn't add seam allowance on the interfacing. The interfacing is just the same size with the pattern paper. Now the same thing with the collar fall. I didn't add seam allowance on the interfacing. So the next thing I'm going to do is to iron the interfacing on the fabric. I'll do it and show you the outcome. Now this is my collar. I've ironed interfacing on the fabric, and I left 1/2 inch seam allowance all around it. I also did the same thing on this one. Now take note, I have 2 collar stand and 2 collar fall. Now the next thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to sew this with, I'm going to sew it with I'm going to place it right side facing right side. I'll place it right side facing right side, and I'm going to sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now after sewing it with 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to turn it to the right side, and I'll place the collar fall in between the collar stand, and I'm going to sew. And I'm going to sew it this way. I'm going to place it this way. That is after sewing it. After sewing the collar fall, I'm going to place the collar fall in between the collar stand, right side facing right side, and I'm going to sew it. I'm going to sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like this. I'll sew here and I'll turn it. I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. Now this is my collar. My collar is ready. Now after that, I'm going to fold my collar into 2, and I will notch the midpoint. I'm going to notch the midpoint of it, just like this. Now after notching the midpoint, I'm going to bring my shirt, and I'm going to notch the midpoint of my shirt, and I'm going to place my collar. I'll place my collar on my shirt, just like this, right side facing right side. The part that I notched, the midpoint that I notched, I'm going to place it, and I'll sew. I'm going to sew it this way. Now let me illustrate with pin. I'm going to sew it. Now after sewing it this way, and now I'm going to hold, after sewing that part, I'm going to hold this part and use this part to cover the seam allowance. I'm going to sew in such a way that you're not going to see the seam allowance. You're not going to see the seam allowance here, and you will not see the seam allowance here. The seam allowance will be inside. I'm going to do it neatly. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. So this is my sleeve. Now because I don't want this video to be too long, I'm going to make another video. I'm going to do another tutorial on how to make a shirt sleeve. Now I'm going to notch the mid part of the armhole of my sleeve. Now take note, this part is not the midpoint of the armhole of this shirt. This is not the midpoint. Now this is the midpoint of the armhole of the shirt. Now I'm going to hold the armhole of the sleeve, the midpoint of the armhole of the sleeve, and the midpoint of the shirt. Now let me notch the armhole of the sleeve. Now this is the midpoint. This is the midpoint, and this is the midpoint of the armhole of my shirt. This is not the midpoint, this is the midpoint. So let me notch it. Now I'm going to place it right side facing right side. I'll place the shirt, the sleeve and the shirt right side facing right side, and I'm going to sew it this way. Then I'm going to sew this other part this way. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. Now after that, now I'm going to fix the button of my shirt. Now take note, while fixing the button of my shirt, the buttonhole is going to be on the right, while the button will be on the left. That is for a female shirt. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. So after sewing, now this is my shirt. Now this is the wrong side and this is the right side. So that's just it with this tutorial. So I'm going to wear it and show you what it looks like. We've come to the end of this tutorial. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends, share this video in your sewing groups, subscribe to my channel if you've not done so. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Lizama Stitches. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.